The progression of chemical use. This does not say the progression of marijuana use, the progression of alcohol use. It's the progression of chemical use. Kids are not addicted or hooked on marijuana. They're not. See it all day long in my practice. They're not hooked on OxyContin. They're hooked on intoxication. It's evidenced all day long when I see kids in my practice whose primary drug, we'll say, was marijuana. They were smoking it pretty frequently for the last couple of years, and now they're being drug tested, and all of a sudden now they're drinking alcohol. And they weren't really into alcohol before. It's because they weren't hooked on marijuana, they're hooked on intoxication, and that's how it works. If a drug user is using their drug of choice and God wipes that drug off the face of the earth tomorrow, do you think they're going to be sober? No. They're going to find another source of intoxication. So we're talking about kids, trying to understand a kid's relationship to intoxication and how to intervene in that relationship to intoxication. So this progression is about understanding that. There's no distinction. The symptoms of heroin abuse or heroin addiction is not very different than the symptoms of marijuana abuse and marijuana addiction. There's about a 5% difference in biology, what it does to the body, but 95% of it is indistinguishable. If I tell you guys to help me out today, I have a client who's using a drug, and I want you to tell me which drug they're using. Since this person has started using, their friendships have changed. They've increasingly started lying to the family, pulling away from family. Their mood is erratic. Their grades went from, honor roll to probation. They've started to get in trouble with the law. Their money somehow has always gone, and they're lying to you and taking your money to use drugs. They're getting in trouble. Neighbors or their friends' parents are calling you and expressing concern. Which drug is that? It's all of them. It's any of them. The symptoms are all the same. Once a person's in a pathological relationship to intoxication, the way it plays out in their life is the same. What it does to their body might be a little bit different from drug to drug. So experimentation, the notion of teenage experimentation is really defined as a one-time event. That's what experimentation is. Once they experience intoxication, the research is done. The experiment's over. They've got the results of the experiment. They either like it or they don't. Anything beyond that is no longer experimentation. They're not doing reliability testing in their research where they have to repeat the same study over and over again to make sure it's good research. They know. There's about 4 different reactions a kid has when they use drugs for the first time. I love it, I hate it, or maybe I'll do this again someday, or hey, let's do that this weekend. Somewhere in there in that continuum is the result of the research. Misusers, the second stage, are kids who use on very infrequent occasions, typically infrequent social occasions, not using on the weekends, but they're using at the school dances, at graduation, Christmas break, spring break. The big phenomenon that I've learned about in the last 10 years, 420, April 20th. You guys all familiar with April 20th? I'm going to tell you here, this sounds extreme, but 99% of your kids are very aware of the date, April 20th. April 20th is the biggest marijuana smoking day of the year. Kids are all knowing of this day. Ask your kid when you go home tonight, seriously, ask them, just to mess with them and throw them off a little bit. Just say, hey, April's just around the corner. What are you doing on April 20th? And they'll look at you and say, what do you know about April 20th? I'm telling you, you'll have a good laugh tonight. I'm defining these stages of drug use as frequency, and now I want to say that frequency really has not a lot to do with somebody's relationship to intoxication. The way I would rather understand it is that experimentation and misuse, to me, is that they don't have a relationship to intoxication at this point. Not to minimize and discount it and say it's not dangerous, but they don't have yet a pathological relationship to intoxication. They're not developing an emotional, trusting relationship to intoxication yet. How that is evidenced is that if their drug use creates consequences in their life, they quit using. That's misuse and experimentation. Consequences occur, they're done. Because in their hierarchy of values, where family comes first and then school and then friends and hobbies and sports, and drugs is way at the bottom. So if drugs affects any of those other areas of their life, they'll quit using because their relationship to you is more important. Their relationship to succeeding in school is more important. However, as people get into substance abuse, now the third stage here, now we're talking about a pathological relationship to intoxication. Substance abuse is when somebody now has a relationship to intoxication that they're going to hold on to and protect and start to push others away when they try to intervene. And that hierarchy of values where family is on top and drugs is at the bottom slowly starts to get flipped upside down, and especially as they creep into chemical dependency or addiction. Now you might wonder, well, gosh, John, that's just teenage adolescent rebellion. We see that anyway. Well, what I get to see in my practice is kids get sober. And when the kids get a few months of sobriety, that hierarchy goes right back. Wow, family's important to me, school's important to me, and drugs is way at the bottom. Substance abuse is defined as using despite negative consequences versus the previous stages. I quit because of negative consequences. And substance abuse is an emotional illness. Where I said earlier, I work with good kids with a bad illness. And I mean that as an illness. And what I mean when I say substance abuse as an emotional illness, I mean we can take a good, healthy kid, give them drugs long enough to develop substance abuse, and that will create an emotional illness. I'm not talking about the emotional illness of undiagnosed psychiatric issues, self-medicating for depression, self-medicating for anxiety, family issues, and ADD that weren't diagnosed and weren't treated. So now they're using marijuana to regulate their emotions or affect. I'm not talking about that. That could be there too. I'm talking about we can take a good, healthy, normal kid, give them drugs long enough to create substance abuse, and that in and of itself intrinsically will create an emotional illness. Some examples of that is one is that their values change, and I already actually talked about that, how that hierarchy of values will really start to shift in terms of what's important in their life. Next will be that their emotional growth gets stunted. You've heard the term before, arrested development, emotional arrest, where people emotionally stop growing. You know, chronologically, you're getting older, but how many of us know 40 and 50-year-olds that are really coming from a 16-year-old place emotionally in terms of how they function in relationships, negotiating relationships, dealing with their own emotions and regulating how they feel? You know, society stunts growth. A lot of things can stunt growth, but drug use during the adolescent years really can. During adolescence, you might be attuned to this and remember this, but during adolescence, we experience a broader range of emotions than we've ever had before in our life, and a deeper sense and feeling and connection to those emotions. One of the developmental tasks psychologically during this stage is to learn how to experience with that, sit with that, or identify it, experience it, express it, and develop coping skills for regulating that. Even something as what would seem as superficial as boredom as an emotional state. So during this developmental task, if all of a sudden somebody's really experiencing a lot of boredom, healthy normal kids pick up the phone, enhance their social skills, call up friends, learn how to brainstorm, negotiate relationships, discover things to do, and go out and experience new things in this world, and had developed social skills along the way, and they learn to use relationships to regulate how they feel. They learn how to self-soothe and find other activities and hobbies. And that's just with a superficial emotion like boredom. What happens to the kid then during this developmental task who's now using substances? I'm bored and I get high. I have no motivation to go out and try to find other reasons to change how I feel because I'm feeling pretty darn good right now. I'm stressed and I'm bored and I smoke weed or I drink some beer and I'm like, wow, just stay here all night, doing pretty good. But their emotional development has stopped at that point. So that's one of the things regarding the emotional illness. It also distorts emotions. We all are connected, hopefully, to what we experience emotionally. We certainly can't hide from what we feel physically. If somebody pinched your arm or if you put your hand in the fire, you'd feel pain. And that sensation of pain serves the purpose to keep you alive physically. It lets you know that what you're doing is wrong to your body, and if you keep doing it, you're going to die.